Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here tonight with us. I'm Sam, Commissioner Sam Eigner-Trewergy from the Department of Early Education and Care, and excited to be able to share some updates from EEC and the landscape and provide a little bit more information about some of the announcements we made at the EEC board meeting last week. We had a number of questions shared with us beforehand and wanted to make sure you knew that we were going to answer many of those this evening and have, if there are additional ones, you can be posting those in the chat and we'll get to as many of them as we can as the evening progresses. Before we begin our presentation tonight, I wanted to take a look at the last year. Here we are a year into the state of emergency. Since then, we just have been watching families, our providers, and each other with really navigating increased uncertainty, need, and many, many difficult choices. At EEC, we've done all we can to try to provide supports to the field, as well as children and families, reduce as many barriers we can during this tumultuous time. But we've also just watched our communities and our programs come together and mobilize to meet the new needs for families. We partnered with GBH and created family resources to support support parents as their children's first and most important teachers, and provide things like scavenger hunts and games that they can help play and continue to help their children learn during this time of increased uncertainty. We have watched our residential and placement programs work and create COVID-specific units where they were able to ensure that quarantine and isolation procedures be followed and that their residents and staff remain safe through this time. And beginning a year ago, we had our childcare programs closed for 3 months, and we created quickly an emergency childcare program and watched over 5,000 of you watched over 500 of you come in and step up and be able to serve your communities and the essential workers that still needed care for their children as we navigated the first months of COVID. And then last June, we reopened programs, and the initial months we saw over 5,000 programs coming back in, childcare programs coming back into operations and serving children. By September, it was clear that our work to support programs needed to be more integrated and more aligned with our partner agencies, and the urgency of the support as families tried to navigate a longer crisis than we ever anticipated became more urgent. We watched as communities came together with school districts who were providing different learning strategies, and watched our providers, our childcare providers and our community resources come together to build collaborations and support those remote learners in new and different ways, and families who needed new and different types of supports than they did just a year ago. We have really worked hard throughout the last year to try to find creative solutions for working families. We allowed for more flexibility in our childcare subsidy policies to ensure families didn't have barriers as they sought resources during times of tremendous need. We worked to keep up and make sure that all of our providers, all of our support networks had the resources and the information particularly they need as things were changing quickly throughout the last year. And in 2021, over the last few months, we've really tried to relaunch a strategic initiative that would help us continue to build back better as we look at the years ahead. We revisited and relaunched our strategic plan and worked through working with all of you to create an implementation plan that would help us make sure we are following a roadmap to really building back better. We launched initiatives like the early childhood support organizations that were allowing our programs who were ready for in-depth instructional coaching to benefit from the promising models from around the country. We approved new background record check regulations to allow us to restart some of the policy initiatives we know all of you were asking us to review as we went forward. And of course, we continued our subsidy policies and created a new parent copay model, some of the most innovative work in the country, to provide ongoing support for a much different and innovative way of looking at parent fee structures. We're excited, while we will continue to pay our parent fees, we're excited to launch that in July with new technology and systems and guidance for you that make it far easier for parents to be able to afford childcare when being subsidized by EEC copay subsidies. And of course, we've implemented the increases in budget that we received in the FY21 general in the state budget. We voted last month on a 2% subsidy increase across the board, doubling our transportation rates and increasing our administrative add-on rates to make sure that during this time we continue to put the investments into our childcare subsidies that we know Massachusetts needs to make. But I want to be clear that these initiatives are just the start, and that your engagement in these efforts have continued to make our work of the Strategic Action Plan meaningful, and really making sure that we are doing our work with integrity and learning from you about the ways that you need us to implement these policies and initiatives to really truly support the work ahead. That engagement has been tremendous, and more than 9,000 people have accessed our website so far. We've had really amazing turnout with 17 live engagement sessions with over 2,500 registrants. In addition, we have responses that have 2,000 responses to date, just that we continue to put our surveys out that have 2,000 responses to date. If you use the QR code on your screen right now, just point your camera on your phone to it. It will take you directly to the website to learn more about these initiatives and all of the work that we have going on now. We're hearing already in this work. I wanted to highlight some of the things we're hearing already in this work and understanding where and how we can turn this feedback into action as we look to develop our initiatives and continue on with the work ahead. We've heard in licensing sessions that it's important we take more consideration of our licensing standards by program type. And we add flexibility so that you can all continue to support an innovative and move away from just a compliance approach within those. Throughout our quality sessions, we have heard about the importance of stressing adult-child interactions as one of the top 3 indicators of quality for a program. Programs really helped us describe 2 ways to think about this, both in nurturing and comforting care, as well as opening communication and reflective listening and conversations that are didactic and go back and forth. We also heard that when we consider these, we have to take into account what quality means for ages and program types and where that might look different across the different types of programs we support. In addition, we've had sessions on subsidies and financing for our system. And we've heard real feedback on the tension between providing affordability for families and providing the revenue that programs sustain themselves on to provide to serve those families with quality services. And we know that this is a tension as we look at things like copays, as we look at things like subsidy rates, and particularly as we look at things like investments in our programs overall, and understanding what impact that might have on affordability for families to access this critical infrastructure. In the end, we definitely heard that programs need more revenue to sustain their work, particularly in this time with fluctuations in enrollment. But we also heard from educators and the enthusiasm that about the increased professionalism for the field through our ideas and initiatives on credentialing. Overwhelmingly, we heard feedback that we need to focus as much on experience in the field as in addition to training and education, and to figure out how we can verify and recognize the extensive experience many of our family childcare many of our family childcare providers, for example, have. And we know that this is a unique position that each of our components of the system needs to be reflected and supported when we're looking at codifying an educator credential. And we heard deep concerns about educators leaving the field and are taking that critically into it as feedback as we look ahead. I just wanted to highlight a few of the things that we are hearing, and I want to encourage you to participate in the many, many more sessions we have planned for April and May. To hear where these initiatives are headed, and as we continue to get iterative feedback and responses for you in real time. First, I want to let you know that these two sessions are very unique. They are real-time engagement, and we have built in ways to mirror what we might get in a real live dialogue that we can't have right now due to health and safety considerations. So please join, bring your phone, bring your computer, and be prepared to actively respond to questions about how we are designing our initiatives real time. I also want to highlight that this will be part of our CCDF and CCDBG Child Care Development Block Grant state plan that we are required to submit on every 5 years. This feedback will be used to help inform and help create our plan that will be submitted to the federal government. So please do keep engaged with this and help us understand the ways that we need to address and support your programs and your services as we move ahead. As we go ahead, I wanted to highlight for you that as you participate in the feedback, many of you have asked about what is the process for our regulatory revisions, where will we be, and how are we looking through this? You have in front of you the work to show that all of our regulations are currently under development and under revision. And as we've talked about these, one of the real critical components is that the interconnection between all of these pieces. I wanted to highlight that that I don't think you can see at the bottom, but the residential and placement regulations are also part of this and are on their own trajectory for this as well. But as we talk about the suite of EEC regulations, what we're really trying to do is understand early stages. Where are the pain points and the successes? What things are fostering innovation and what things are preventing it? As we look ahead at the dramatic different needs that families will have, we want to make sure that our foundational regulations are allowing for the type of responsive services that we know all of our families will need as they navigate different work, school, and community landscapes going forward. But I want to highlight as we look at this process, the iteration between the early direction, the external engagement, revisions, and then coming back to you with ideas and innovations for you to respond to. Again, please keep in touch with us on those engagement sessions, because those will be your opportunity to see real live time those decision points that we are grappling with. The principles as we consider this really are looking at the implications for equity in each and every decision point, understanding how this will impact all communities, and particularly communities of color and families that are vulnerable and in need. We also want to ensure that we have plenty of room for innovation and we're not stifling the types of creative solutions you all will need to find as you grapple with the years ahead. and making sure we use simple language that everyone can understand. And that we aren't adding bureaucratic burden just for the sake of adding, that we're really trying to reduce the number of steps and bureaucracy and focus on those things that really matter as we're driving improvement and community cohesion across our landscape. We also want to think about what we're trying to communicate in our regulations overall. Considering where our evidence base is for indicators of quality, ensure that we are encouraging programs and providers and educators and families to focus on that activity, those types of activities that really do drive child and family outcomes and not just help us meet compliance. We also, of course, are looking at our sister agencies and ensuring that we are aligning and creating cohesion across those other regulatory bodies as well. And of course, we are doing this all in collaboration with you and with our staff to make sure that everyone has a chance to weigh in and really understand what these changes will mean for their work and their worlds. I want to recognize that the BRC, the background record check regulations that were passed and provided the framework that will now be engaging in policy. I want to highlight that we are engaging on that. We've just started, but we've also brought on new leadership in our department to help oversee this. Andrew Rome, who had been at the Department of Children and Families, has joined EEC and will help us now start considering the background record check policies as we overhaul and really think about transitioning that system into being more person-centric and supportive to our providers and our educators. Ultimately, those background record checks are driving towards clarified and streamlined policies and really much more responsive to an operational process that will provide fluidity as well as expedite our background record checks so that you're getting your responses quicker and more accurately. As we look ahead, though, into FY22, I wanted to recap some of the conversation we had last time. These are the same slides you saw in January, so I won't repeat everything, but we've condensed them to be able to highlight the big pictures of the changes underway. As you look through these, I want to highlight that our strategic plan did highlight the need for us to look at the system supporting programs and educators and families and really invest in the types of systems that would allow us to address the biggest pain points and cohesion, really integrating all of these really critical components and puzzle pieces of our landscape together in the best role possible for EEC. We also addressed in our strategic plan the need for revising the financing structures that were supporting specifically our childcare system, moving away from the per child model that prevents us from investing in compensation and the type of robust supports our providers and our educators and our families need. And with the federal funding that we've received through the stimulus dollars, we now have an opportunity and actually an imperative to try to think differently about how we fund our programs throughout this recovery. The per child funding model that has supported childcare with the enrollment fluctuating as it is over the last year and throughout the year ahead will continue to be a challenge if we don't address some really critical financing structures that can help stabilize the field and keep the capacity that we need when we come on the other side of recovery. So while we'll talk about these financing innovations a little bit later in the presentation, I really wanted to highlight some of the bigger questions around how our program initiatives are really coming in together. As you saw and as you know, our licensing regulations are really the foundation for much of our program work. And so making sure that we are updating, making them streamlined, coherent, and as I said, with the principles I mentioned, driving towards flexibility and innovation. But we know that regulations aren't enough. And with that, we need to think about quality improvement. What is the plan for quality improvement? This year, which we'll talk about in a moment, we have moved away from the quality rating and improvement system that childcare has been utilizing, and really focusing on our programs as a process of quality improvement as opposed to a moment in time. But we also know that that takes a variety of kind of supports for both our programs and our children and families. And so our investments in looking at our program supports, understanding where we need to innovate and implement new research, as well as trying to understand what kind of supports we've been investing in that need to pivot or shift given the new landscape thanks to COVID. And then really investing in those and understanding not only what those look like for our center-based programs, but doing some real intentional work around family childcare. We know and we've heard that and around the country, we've struggled with making sure that there is a model and a support system that is specific to family childcare, knowing about what a critical component of our system this is. We are currently underway in trying to understand this component of our sector, understand those that are supporting them, and the types of tools and resources that are needed to be able to make sure that a family childcare, a huge asset in the Massachusetts system, continues to play a critical role as we come through recovery. But we also know, as we're financing and supporting programs with public dollars, that many of you did not get into this field and did not get into childcare and early education and care because of your love of finances and budgeting. And so we want to make sure that you all have the resources and have the ability to be able to really think through the implications of increased public dollars and be able to manage those and plan for them and really have the resources you need to be successful. If we go on to the next slide, wanted to talk about the two other components that we are really working on very aggressively when we think about educators and families. As I said, what we need when we talk about educators, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we see that the functions that EEC plays, the background record checks, the creating a registry that can support and define our educators going forward, so that we have one database that has all of the resources that they might need or we might need, and they don't have to grapple with different components and different systems within EEC. In addition, making sure we have a framework that we're measuring coherently, consistently, how we communicate to programs and to our field, what increasing competency level looks like in early education and care. And of course, our work with families. We will continue to work on our subsidy access, continuing the great work we've laid through with the parent fees, of reducing our parent fees dramatically, but also understanding what does the future of parent demand look like over the next few years. We know that parents will have a very different relationship with work as employers are looking at remote working strategies, and that things like commuting and transportation will look very different as we move through the next couple of years. But we also need to make sure that we are keeping children and families informed about, and that all of us are working towards the same goals with children throughout the birth to third grade continuum. So we'll begin and start thinking about the stakeholder engagement that will really drive some feedback on how and where could we be monitoring and making sure that we are doing better by children as we are investing our funds into communities and local infrastructure. And know that takes community collaboration, and we're seeking ways that we will be able to work building from partnerships like the Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative that have taught us about the kinds of investments we need to make to really make sure communities are set up for success in building the infrastructure to support children and families in the early years. As we move on to the next slide, I wanted to get a little bit deeper into what we are looking for, what we're looking in terms of quality. As we look at program quality, particularly as we look at childcare program quality, wanting to think about it's not a point in time, but all the research will show us that it is a continuous quality improvement mindset that we're really seeking to evaluate, to understand how and where a program leader, an educator is working to do this plan, do, review process. We know that Massachusetts licensing regulations are what many, many states have strived to achieve in their quality rating system. So our baseline for quality is far stronger than many, many states' starting point. That said, we know that as we revise the licensing regulations and that foundation, that there need to be tools and common understanding that of what it means to support quality and monitor quality as a process and not a point in time. For that reason, we won't be going back to an application for a quality rating. We will instead be prioritizing funding to provide those tools, provide the data, the resources, and the professional supports you all need to be able to think about that continuous quality improvement mindset. By building a shared language and shared tools, we hope that we can really help invest in the type of quality improvement efforts that are informed by data, that have support for implementation, and have time and capacity to reflect on how it went and what you might need to do better next time. This is not because we aren't doing great, but the continuous quality improvement mindset looks for opportunities to understand the children you're serving, the families you're working with, and what you're implementing in your program design to be able to really reflect on how we can continue to do better and be more responsive to children. So as we've looked through this definition of quality for this year, as you know, we won't be working through the quality rating and improvement system. And again, we won't be going back to an application for a quality rating. We want to invest in the types of tools and supports and really make sure that all of you have the quality you're achieving in the licensing standards and regulations is reflected, and that we learn from the last decade of investments in the quality rating across the country and understand that the investments that we need to make are in the programs and the educators and the supports to that program and not on the monitoring and application process. So excited to continue to evolve this work with you and to dig deeper, and very much encourage you to, again, engage in our engagement sessions and go deeper on these conversations. So we take into account your feedback as we look to rebuild a very different process going forward. But now I want to talk a little bit about what that requires. We know that for you to be able to provide high quality programming, that one of the really key components is understanding the workforce and understanding how and where our programs rely on competent educators and educator competency in order to be successful. So we're looking at our licensing regulations and understanding that we need to be able to support educators across programs. I heard from so many of you last fall when I went and visited programs and went and visited communities, heard in our sessions. I heard from so many of you about the educator who had been a family childcare provider and then moved and gone into a classroom and then was a home visitor and maybe came back to family childcare at a different point of their life. Well, we know a lot of you have continuous experience and have chosen a profession and have stuck with the role. Many, many of you are grappling with life changes that force different kinds of engagement with this field. And one of the really hard problems we have is when your qualification is defined by your program role. It's very difficult for us to validate and foster the kind of increases in competency that we know you're building across those different roles. So as we've looked at our regulations ahead, we are looking to separate those regulations that are around program, what a program is expected to do and the roles they're expected to have, and the competency and the increased expectations or increased validation for educators as they increase their years of experience, their professional development, and their work in the field. And so it's really important that we look at educators as distinct from the programs in which they work. So we can support them and we can help programs distinguish readiness and the types of support those educators need. And this means that we are looking for new opportunities to define this work differently and what it means to actually have regulations that define, that support both the program and the educator in progressing in a continuous quality improvement mindset. So I want to acknowledge that this has been incredibly difficult, and this is not an easy thing that we know that the entire country is grappling with. Those of you who follow the NACCE guidance, the NACCE work, the power of the profession, know that this has been years in development across different states and considerations to be able to understand how you develop something that really does support providers and support educators to stay in the field, to differentiate their competencies, and to be able to make sure that that then leads to both the career ladder and the financing to support compensation. We have to solve some key problems to make this happen. One, we know that our educators, as I said, who may be going in and out of state or in and out of program roles, they may be going from Worcester to Boston to Pittsfield as we think about different life challenges that they may be, or different life circumstances that they may be responding to. And we need a system that makes sure that we understand how those different roles, regardless of what part in the state you're in, helped you increase your expertise in this field. And so that you don't have to start over every time when you're trying to prove for yourself for a new job. The key features of our approach to credentialing will really be a way to make sure that we differentiate between those educators who are new and just entering the field, those that are veteran educators who have skillfully addressed, skillfully gained competency and expertise in addressing the social and emotional needs of children, for example. We want to make sure that they build on one another, that there is a clear pathway, and that we are embedding those in a way that mirror the qualifications that we expect you to have as you contribute to programs, as you contribute to the education of young children through programs and with their work with families. And we want to make sure that these skills and behaviors are reflected as progress in your career. And so we will be building a registry, a database that will house a person's information, everything from suitability status to the credential level. This will be a multi-year project, but to be able to ensure that we have one system that captures all the information and allows us to achieve these really ambitious goals on behalf of the workforce. This will help us document, it will help us help make sure that we are updating our technology systems where paper processes will be replaced by more efficient electronic processes, and will align with our licensing database so that all of the information on the educators isn't housed within the program itself. This will be a multi-pronged process, but we want you to know that we are focusing on this as a key workforce strategy, and encourage you to come to our engagement sessions and continue to help us define where Massachusetts can be a national leader in driving not only a credential process for our educators, but also ensuring that's tied to program quality and to program compensation, so that we can drive those career ladders and compensation goals that we know our educators need to stay in the field and continue doing their best work. As we go on the next system, I will add the other one. We are not looking to get rid of the information that currently exists in the other database, but rather consolidate those into the new database. So many, many more conversations to be had about how that will happen. As I said, this will be a multi-year long process, but wanted to let you know what we're working on to be able to make sure that we are streamlining and making it much easier for our programs as we go forward. Now to talk about some of the financing opportunities. We know that the early care and education operational model for childcare was insufficient even before COVID. We had a fragile business model that was built on those per child revenue that really made it difficult to sustain fixed operational costs. And we also know that we had a huge supply-demand gap that made it very difficult to adequately meet the needs of the Commonwealth's children and families. And as I said, we also know that the years ahead will look very different for families, and we need to make sure that we're providing the flexibility and the support for programs not to be wholly dependent on day-to-day enrollment, but to be able to be the capacity, the support, and the resources that our families need from this critical infrastructure. We also know, excuse me, that we've lost a number of programs through the reopening. Over 15% of our providers didn't return or have yet to return to all of our to operations. And we have families making very difficult decisions every single day, ups and downs in enrollment based on community risk and other family needs. But operational costs continue to be high and even higher than before for our childcare programs. And so there's a need for even more revenue to sustain just the same operations. In the face of all of these challenges, we have looked at the funding that we have and have done as much as we can to quickly operationalize and deploy the funding to address these needs. And I wanted to focus on the three-pronged approach that we're looking at here. We do currently have an FY21 budget that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor that provides some funding that is aside from the per child funding model. 85% of EEC's budget goes into childcare subsidies per our legislatively appropriated budget. This year, the legislature and the governor had created an operational reserve that will allow us to capture any funding that is not available, that is not spent through the per child model, and allow more flexibility on how we provide that to programs. At this point, we are looking to be able to deploy that funding quickly. The language as written currently limits our ability to give the funding only to subsidized programs, but we are working as we look ahead to broaden that language and broaden the stimulus for the stimulus investment. This money, the operational reserve that was created, does have $25 million loaded into it. And so with that, we have been looking at two investments specifically: workforce investments for center-based programs and family childcare home investments that would look at programmatic investments for health and safety and quality. At this point, we have that is the funding we have deployed. So we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in a minute. But I wanted to highlight that we're already planning for the stimulus investment. That money does need to go through an appropriations process. It was passed by the federal government and provided to Massachusetts after the General Assembly finalized the FY21 budget. So the money that is from the federal government is not available for EEC to spend until it does go through an appropriations process and is given by the legislature and signed by the governor to be allowed to be spent by EEC. However, we obviously know the urgency of these funds and are working as quickly as possible to be ready to collaborate and deploy those funds when the appropriation is granted to us. And in addition, we know there's already the next round of federal stimulus dollars that are being designed and deployed from the federal government. And we are thinking critically about what that might mean for our FY22 planning and what that looks like in conjunction with some of the state funding as we prepare for the landscape ahead. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the specifics of the funding, but I wanted to highlight a couple more things on this slide before we move on. I also wanted to highlight that we are making investments from our budget in things that we find economies of scale at the systems level. So things like our parent fees, our PPE, and our testing are things that we are spending out of our EEC budget to take the burden off of individual programs while we build these new financing structures for the years ahead. We also wanted to highlight that these will offer us an opportunity to understand where and how some of you are spending your money, or where, so that we can be better data informed as we look at FY22 and beyond. Well, you all know the intimate details of your programs, and we know some baseline information across programs. We're missing some really critical information to make the best decisions possible. And we'll use this opportunity to try to make sure that we are getting that data, so we can target our funds and make appropriate accountability and expectations for those funds without overburdening you all going forward. Excuse me. As we go on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit more about the specific grants ahead. So as you know, as I mentioned, our state funding does allow us to start with these critical grants critical grants right now that will address some of the biggest pain points we're hearing in the system. Much more detail is available in writing in the March board materials, and you have a QR code at the bottom that you can point your phone at and get to make sure that you can read all of the details ahead. As I said, the FY21 operational grants, the legislature did pass language in our current budget that limits our ability to spend that money beyond subsidized programs. So we were able to try to address that with family childcare, but unfortunately, with center-based programs, we are unable to expand that beyond our subsidized programs. These workforce grants, we will underwrite staffing costs for FY21. It will look at things like hazard pay and vacation time, mental health pay, new capacity or stipends that you've been providing to the staff, really thinking about what we've been hearing from all of you, the real difficulty in being able to address the additional burden that this is causing, that the COVID crisis is causing your workforce, making sure that you all are able to do what you need to do to support the professionals who have been showing up and caring for our children for the last year. We also want to make sure that that there are incentives and the right kind of supports for those of you who've taken on additional burden in serving school-age learners during this time at pace and race and length of days that you never anticipated. This will, when we look at the family childcare grants, we will look to supplement these dollars with some additional funding we were able to secure to be able to include programs that participate in the subsidy systems and those who do not. We will look at, again, more details on the board page, but a stipend per family childcare home to support health and safety and quality improvements within the family childcare program. Anything and add-on funding to support remote learners. These will also be able to support family childcare assistance or additional staffing that you need to be able to bring on to be able to support the same amount of children. A couple notes on this. This will be through a targeted formula approach. So for the center-based programs, we're aiming to look at about $750 for every 5 children a program is licensed to serve. And for family childcare home, about $3,000 per family childcare home. Again, all of these details are available in the board materials, and use the QR code at the bottom of the screen to get more of that in writing. We also will look at the family childcare systems and making sure that those that are providing support services to our family childcare during this time are also supported through this work. We do aim to have this out by the end of the month, but are working as quickly as possible to try to put all the systems in place that are needed to deploy this funding well. And so we'll keep you updated as we head over the next couple of weeks as to what that timing will look like. As I mentioned, the stabilization grants, we are looking to support all of our programs using the federal stimulus dollars. This is over 80% of the federal stimulus dollars that will be supported directly to all of our programs. While the funding has not yet been appropriated, so any challenges, any restrictions put by the legislature will have to be taken into consideration as we look through, as we implement the plan that we're planning for. But at this point, we anticipate having a formula approach. We're calling it the Commonwealth Cares for Children formula. That will be a formula that will take into account the size of the program, the staffing model as it relates to quality, and the population and community that it's serving. When we look at these, we're still working through the data points, and again, really encourage you to participate in our engagement activities where we're getting real-time feedback that will help inform how we set this formula up in a way that can really take into account all the nuances of our community dynamics and the programs and children you're serving. This is looking to go to over 6,800 programs, both subsidized and not subsidized. And there will be a requirement to remain in operations and report on key data points so that we can make sure that we are good stewards of these big public dollars and prepared for the next round of federal stimulus that is already in the works. We also will ensure that our small businesses are on equal footing with large multi-state entities, for example, and working very closely with our peer states in New England to make sure that we are pursuing a similar strategy and sharing getting efficiencies and data to make sure we are making the best point possible and providing the best insight possible of how we can implement this as the federal and state governments look to the years ahead. And we are certainly looking to learn and prepare for us for a different future so we can build back better. So understanding how this type of foundational funding supports stability in programs and where it intersects with our subsidies and how we support continued tuition subsidies and scholarships for parents, but also making sure that we are relying on programs, stable programs to be able to accept them. And really trying to figure out how we maintain capacity in our programs and ensure that we are providing the innovation that our programs can continue to meet the needs of children and families far into the future. So we look to the next slide. I want to highlight that there are a number of updates beyond the financing that are underway and impact communities across the Commonwealth. We want to make sure that we are doing our part as COVID numbers reduce and vaccinations increase, that we're doing our part to support a return to more in-person services through the spring and fall when the weather is nice and we can all abide by the best practices for continued health and safety that we need. We have seen the incredible sacrifices that all of you have made over the last year. Everyone from the educators working every day in more stressful settings, program leaders and program childcare program leaders grappling with various types of operational constraints, our community supports moving to figuring out how do you support families in remote ways? What do play groups look like when you're doing this over Zoom? How do you keep up with the very different needs that families have and ensure that we're continuing to refer to the appropriate services as families seek different kinds of resources? But we also know, as we've made all of these triumphs and we have worked with families who have a different engagement themselves, that this virus is still unpredictable and is still present. And so while spring is coming, it's the right time for us to allow more flexibility, but we have to stay vigilant. We'll be working to revise our minimum requirements in our playbook, revise our guidance to all of our grantees and providers and support systems to make sure that we can support more in-person services during the warmer months when they can be done more outside, where you can increase ventilation by opening windows and making sure that the strategies that we know work to prevent transmission of the viruses are now embedded in what we're asking for our communities. And really, we know that we want to explore how decisions about health and safety can be put more into the hands of those on the ground with a very strong guidance about what kinds of practices we expect to be in place to make sure that as you grapple with the everyday realities for children and families, that you are understanding the potential trade-offs in exposure and virus mitigation. Now I wanted to provide a few system updates of things we've been investing in and wanted to make sure you knew about what was coming. As you all know, we provided testing for childcare staff, families, as well as the children attending, started about 6 weeks ago. As of this morning, we have about 1,400 people that have been tested at these sites. And we're working to use this data on when testing is happening and who's showing up to make sure that we continue to expand access for the field. We'll be increasing the available testing for several of the locations going forward, moving it to about 6 days a week so that there's more access in more communities. Again, want to stress that there is no appointment necessary and you can register on site if you need. And we'll also be adjusting the hours to make sure that we are responsive to when people are actually showing up. We're seeing a lot more demand in the morning when families are needing to make quick decisions along the way. We know that there were challenges with turnaround in the first weeks, and we've addressed these by moving to a different lab and making sure that the mail process that was causing us many of the delays will not be a problem anymore because we now will be using a local lab. But please continue to share updates and share feedback, and we will continue to do this through the commissioner's email, through Facebook and our website, and through our EEC staff here before they take place. So don't worry, nothing will happen before you know, but please do keep up and make sure you're on the commissioner's listserv to get all the information you need. Supplemental PPE continues to be ordered. We have over 5,500 orders for supplemental PPE, and about over 80% of them have already been delivered, with the remainder to be on track to be delivered by the end of the month. For those programs that are delivering this, just a quick reminder that the information is in your lead account. And so you want to go into your lead account, and that orders made by the 5th of the month will be delivered by the end of the month. In addition, I wanted to address some of the return to in-person learning. As you all know, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education did recently announce the plan to reopen all elementary schools for full-time in-person learning April 5th. Obviously, we're keeping in very tight communication and collaboration with DESE around this change, because not only do we know it impacts our childcare providers, but many of you with children at home or working with families in other ways are impacted as they understand what resources and expectations will be for their participation. I want to highlight that the policies still do allow families to opt out for remote learning if they do not feel safe, and it strongly encourages a 2-week notification by the district to the community to ensure that there is time for you to adjust your schedules, families to adjust any care arrangements or changes that they need to do looking at their family unit. EEC's policies that provide flexibility and support to programs are not changing at this time, but we are working to continue those. So all of those policies, the executive order that allows you to continue serving children while they are in school, settings, will not be removed at this time, knowing that many communities will still need to grapple with different kinds of arrangements for families. We want to be supportive as those happen. In addition, our subsidy policies that have allowed families the flexibility to make decisions based on health and safety as opposed to subsidy funding will also remain in place for the time being. We are looking and have changed our transportation policy based on DESE's guidance that came out in February. And we wanted to ensure that there was consistency across youth serving program. And so we have adjusted that as well to align with DESE. So you can look at that. There's no physical distancing necessary as long as everyone is masked. We do hope that everyone will be masked. I wanted to address the vaccine quickly as well. Last Thursday, our early education and care workforce did become eligible, and the new registration system is in place to streamline the process. But I want to remind you to continue to be patient. The availability of the vaccines determines the availability of appointments. We can't give you an appointment to where there is no vaccine. So please be patient, continue to look for appointments. There are 4 educator and childcare only clinics that are being held at the max vaccination sites on Saturday, March 27th, April 3rd, April 10th, and Sunday, April 11th. All of that information can be found on the website. And eligible people in this group include anyone working in or supporting in-person care. That includes individuals like transportation drivers, custodial staff, early intervention providers, educator coaches, family childcare, household members, observers, etc. Please select a child care worker when registering, regardless of your designation. There's no need for a proof of being a child care worker. It is a self-attestation, so you will need to fill out the self-attestation as part of your appointment. The Federal Retail Pharmacy Program did also begin vaccinating K-12 and childcare employees as well. And so you know that is a separate registration process. And so those pharmacies, if you're able to get an appointment at the pharmacy directly, they are also vaccinating our workforce. More info is in the chat, and you'll have lots of resources to help learn about the vaccines and engage in conversations as well. Even when we're vaccinated, though, we really need to continue maintaining health and safety protocols. CDC and DPH are still recommending masks and physical distancing, and we still will be abiding by those recommendations. We've heard concerns about not being able to mix groups at the beginning and the end of the day, and we understand the strain of not allowing adults to float from classroom to classroom. We're working at trying to understand where we can take all of this into consideration and allow for more flexibility as we move forward over the course of the summer. But please stay tuned for that as we work through the nuances of how we can continue to maintain rigorous health and safety protocols so we don't see transmission, we don't see spread of the virus in childcare and with young children and families, and really working to take that public health consideration into practice while we look at the flexibility we can offer you going forward. That does mean that we'll still have to keep good ventilation, masks, as well as utilizing the outdoors as much as possible as we're looking at the warmer months when this is a viable option for you. So as we look at that, wanted to know that there are still many, many pending questions out there around this. And I wanted to highlight that we are working in the coming weeks to update our policies and our playbook to make sure you have revised guidance that will help adjust for the summer months, the spring, summer, and fall months as we are able to adjust to more practices due to the warmer weather. But now I'm going to turn it over to Eli, who will address some of the questions I know have been coming in along the way, and we can take it from there.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance, as well as through the question and answer here on the session. We had questions about the grant opportunities and health and safety requirements that I think the Commissioner has answered over the course of this evening. But Commissioner, there is a question about the vaccine with some back and forth in the question and answer section about whether it would be mandatory for educators. Can you help clarify some of that?
Absolutely. I want to be clear that the choice to get the COVID vaccine is entirely yours. The Department of Public Health, the CDC, strongly recommend vaccination as a way to protect yourself, your family, your community, and certainly the families and children you serve. Resources to help you get the information you need and make this informed decision are available. We want to make sure that there are resources in the chat, and we want to make sure that you are fully informed, that you have all the information you need, and that you have a forum to ask questions and get your questions answered about the science and the experience of getting vaccinated. I know I will personally be scheduling my vaccination appointment as soon as I become eligible. All my parents are vaccinated, as are my sisters who are teachers, and I want to make sure that not in Massachusetts, but my sisters who are teachers elsewhere, and so I do strongly believe that this is a really important choice for us to be making to protect our community. I'll get whichever vaccine is available, as I hope everyone will as we open this. But I do want to stress that this is an intensely personal decision. So please reach out for the support you need to think through your options and get the information you need, and let us know if there's something else you need to help understand and feel comfortable making this really critical decision.
Thank you, Commissioner. There are also questions about visitors or non-essential adults in the program, when in-person licensing visits will resume, and in general about the sort of requirements now versus what we might be looking at in the future. Is there anything you want to share about that?
Absolutely. I want to highlight that we are taking all of this into consideration as we look at revising our minimum requirements. We want to build flexibility where we can, and that likely means having programs make more of their own decisions about what kinds of individuals are allowed in the program, what protocols, and focusing more for us on the protocols that have to be in place if you choose to allow that. Obviously, the health attestation, the wearing a mask, communicating with parents, and ensuring proper ventilation and social distancing as much as possible is really, really important. Um, we have not started in-person visitors from licensors, and we will absolutely let you know before we have started any of that as we assess the landscape. We are taking a really measured approach into taking everyone's health and safety into account. But I do want to stress that our goal is to allow for as much of a return to in-person that we know children and families need, enough as much into making sure that our groups it can be appropriately addressed for staffing models, so you're all able to grapple with enrollment and stable groups as much as possible, while still adding the flexibility to keep to be able to operate your operational model in childcare, for example. So I just want to highlight, we're looking at this. We are looking to return to as much in person as possible while allowing for the flexibility for programs to make decisions on their own about what makes sense in their community. We will be focusing on the practices and the protocols you all need to have in place in order to safely make these decisions on your own.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think there are additional questions about when one is vaccinated and the extent to which one can relax some of the masking and other requirements that have been in place to date.
Yes, the CDC and the DPH and the programs and all of the medical advice still ensures that we keep in the good health and safety practices that we've been utilizing over the last year, of making sure that we are still using masks, that we are still using ventilation and airflow, being outside whenever possible, and making sure that we have plenty of distance. Remember, children won't be vaccinated yet, and we want to make sure that we are continuing to protect every member of our community by putting in the practices and protocols that are necessary, even once we have distributed the vaccination, to be able to ensure that our entire community continues to be healthy and safe. So no, we will not be able to relax these health and safety protocols. We'll still be focusing on those protocols while ensuring we can relax some of the restrictions on operations that have prevented some of the services that families and children have needed and our providers have needed on their behalf. I'm sorry, I need to address the governor's travel order. So there are questions about how it impacts childcare if vaccinated adults do not have to be tested upon return. And so the Massachusetts travel order does state that fully vaccinated individuals do not need to be tested or quarantined when they return from travel, but you still need to abide by the order itself. So want to make sure that gets in the chat and we get that information. We got that information there. Excellent. So I want to make sure that that was in there. We'll get that in and make sure that if there are questions around that, we can deal with that as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being part of this evening and for being engaged in this ongoing dialogue. This has been an incredibly trying year for everyone, and I know we are all exhausted and looking for relief as we head towards the vaccination. And I want to remind you, vigilance on making sure we continue to protect our communities. But really ensuring that you communicate with us on where we can continue to provide the flexibility, the innovation, and the support that we need for you as you grapple with the services you're providing to children and families. I am so so honored to be in this role and be working with all of you through this tumultuous time. And I thank you for your collaboration and continued partnership and continued support of EEC. I also would be remiss if I did not give a shout out to the EEC staff that has been doing amazing work and supporting and responding to all of you in real time. And thank you to all of them. And thank you to all of you with your patience and engagement to them as we go forward.